I'm gonna get emotional. I felt very much that the first dragon experience that I had on top of that mountain was very much like an initiation or a blessing for me to allow to either make peace or to connect or to acknowledge. I'm connecting with my great guardian, Eradaus. I felt it more so when we were on the beach, that I was closer to him and the sorrow that he felt through me or I through him. I think it's what I also feel is the bloodline. I think those dragons that were there on the beach were in that role more so than just being dormant and waiting for their time. With Mother Gaia going to the new earth and the new way of being. I think very much with the whole dragon talk of this podcast is really to release people from the programming or help assist of the programming where they're not real or they're not this, just because you can't see something.
Welcome to Soul Communication episode. In this episode, we'll dive into the dragon energy. I have my beautiful sister here, Alycia Kiskis, and we got to travel all the way to Iceland during summer solstice together and experience all kinds of elemental energies. In Iceland, there's actually 50 different types of what they call hidden people. We experienced fairies, mermaids, trolls, and found some actually dragons on the beach. We'll talk about dragon energy as we have the year of the dragon coming in, the Chinese New Year, year number 8. And the dragons are all about protection and all about abundance and cultivate abundance. I want to hear from you, Alycia, how dragons became so close to your energy field, how you're working with them. I know you have a special connection with them, and you and I also have done quantum healing hypnosis together where your galactic dragon came in and taught me a lot. So I'd love to dive into that as well. It's such a pleasure to have you on this podcast with me as we dive into what it means to connect on the soul level, on universal level, and have the deeper communication to these energies that we might not necessarily be aware of, but they come into our life really powerfully and strongly. And dragons are strong and fierce. All to you, Alycia. Tell us more.
Thank you for having me on your podcast. It's an honor and a beautiful friendship and connection with you. Hands down, thank you very much. Yeah, so when it comes to this year, the wooden dragon, it's very earthy and I feel materialistic. You're going to see and feel the energy of abundance very much. As a little girl growing up, I'm sure a lot of people that grew up may have watched different shows with dragons and everything. I was always attracted to the wildlife, for one, because my mom was a rescuer of wildlife. But as soon as she pointed out, I probably was like 5 or 6, she pointed out a garden snake. And from there, it took off. I was always very curious about them on a reptilian level. And then it was Dragon Heart with Sinead O'Connor, I think. The dragon's name was Draco. I fell in love. When you're a kid and you're not so programmed yet to the society, you're sitting there watching the TV. I'm like, that's real. I want one. I was like, they exist. I know they exist. Ever since that movie, just the connection with the reptiles, I think I correlated that with reptiles in general. I've had a few reptiles of my own, snakes and different lizards. I sensed a different level of connection with these beings that are here now. Going to pet shops as a kid and everything else, I was always directed or called to or magnified to the taboo things. And not a lot of people like spiders, not a lot of people like snakes or reptiles. So I was definitely one of the advocates for enlightening people on reptiles.
What do you think scares people? Why they have that type of reaction to reptilians? Do you think that's somewhere embedded in our psyche? Why are we so conditioned?
I think there's a few aspects. We could get into like the biblical text with the serpent and in the garden. Mm-hmm. We get the social conditioning or parents' conditioning. For example, my mom was terrified of spiders, and I grew up that way because she grew up that way, and I was around that. So it's the programming. As well as people have a very big like misunderstanding when it comes to reptiles, that they're slimy, where they're not. Amphibians are slimy. but that's because they live in water or they need the water and it absorbs through their skin. Snakes and other reptiles and stuff like that, they don't have slimy skin. They have scales. It's armor. The reptiles, they're mostly cold-blooded, so they need to go bask in the sun, and they need that heat to digest their food or to shed their skin, vice versa. When you're gardening or doing stuff outside and you look down, you're like, oh my gosh, that is a thing. It's the jump scare, what we call it these days. But honestly, it's very easy, at least for myself, to crack open that code and for people to be like, hey, you need to like these animals now. But I respect the space that they're in. And I'm like, listen, as much as I understand your fear, every being that is alive today has its role. That's where I usually started off with reptiles and educating them on snakes. Throughout that journey, I had a corn snake, and he just recently passed, 24 years old. So they live a very long time. I met somebody recently in town within the last few years, and they corresponded me with reptiles and getting to the spiritual realm with dragons.
I can see that energy. And I think from what I remember, you do have that energy tied back maybe to like the Rhine system. Do you feel that's possibly the connection there as well?
I definitely feel very much home to them. It's interesting because you could talk to a cat or a dog and the cat will talk back, or the dog will talk back or bark and everything. With certain degrees of animals or insectoids and everything, you can't hear them per se. They could give hisses and everything, but it's more of a telepathic and more of a melding of your energy. So when I applied that to understanding why, because I was starting to question, like, why am I involved with these reptiles? And I always had that love for dragons and everything. And then once I started getting the spiritual community and learned Reiki and met you and your husband, your beautiful family, and explored it, so a friend of mine was like, you know what, you should really meditate on this, because I feel very much so that in your galactic lineage somewhere, there has to be a correspondence. I sat and meditated on it, and it was really ultimately started with talking to my guides and who was around me. I would get snapshots and visions of just this huge, massive thing soaring over me. I thought it was a cloud because just then I was only starting to expand the psychic levels of the abilities and still working on it. And then the word arrow came. And I'm like, arrow. And I had to talk myself through it. Then Eradaus came. And I'm like, what is Eradaus? And then something else came. And I sat there and I'm like, are you a dragon? And I perked up. And I'm like, are you a dragon? Because I could feel, and it was like a hum, like a deep breath. And I'm like, wow. I opened my eye a little bit and I'm sitting there like on the patch of grass. And I'm like, okay, this is me. This is me. I'm hearing this. I'm not going nuts, but I'm the only one here. Shortly after, that's all I got for a little while. But I would feel this massive, I used to call it a he because the masculinity was very much there, the energy. I also felt the balance, but it was very much like oversight, overseeing, and protective. So I resonated that with masculine energy, even though the feminine is just the same on a different level. I got Eradaus, and I looked, it may have been even some kind of light language now that I've known you and talked to you. I broke it down in our terms here. Then arrow was something about love and connection.
The god of love. Yeah.
I was like, okay, this is very interesting. And then you and I met.
Love in the relationship between this energy and you, or you are that energy.
Yeah, it was so beautiful. I kept it to myself, and I would just think about it all the time. I would look through the trees and, can I see you? And it may be a plane passing by, but then I would get a shadow if I'm outside, but you don't see the plane.
Only one, or could there be few dragons that are around us that in our field? I know for you, Eradaus is your galactic aspect, so you're highly connected to that. We can have more than one, perhaps. I'm only connected to one of mine, but some say that we have several.
I think it honestly depends on your energy, what you need, what lineages there are. So many different aspects, just like with guides. Some come, some go, some kind of pop in just for a certain instance in our life. I know a friend of mine, I saw two with him. It was a correlation between burning up both energies. He was having a rough time. Yellow and purple. But for the most part, I've seen one. I also think it depends on how much energy, for one, that you hold, or the building and the foundation of it, and what you allow to come in. If it's just one and you're happy with that one, I've heard of transforming colors, and the dragon is evolving with you. So it's almost like a template. When I came to you for the QHHT, I even asked you, who is Eradaus?
You remain strong during your conversation.
If you want, share that, because that's beautiful. I love hearing about that.
I'm not going to divulge all the details, but the fact was that in QHHT, which is the quantum healing hypnosis modality that was originated by Dolores Cannon, that I practice in this hypnosis, you take people through their past lives. And the last part of the hypnosis is when they bring in the question, and you bring the subconscious or the higher self of the person. And it's interesting to watch where, the ego kind of steps aside, and what Dolores calls they come in, this energy comes in. Sometimes it changes the voice of the person, and sometimes the person doesn't even remember what has transpired at all, because this energy comes in so strong. And I think in your case, Alycia, that energy came in strong to the point where most of it you didn't remember. And I know I was recording, and I was just so humble because that energy, so wise, so multidimensional. And Erin did share about being on these different battlefields between realms and protecting the gates of different realms. This energy of the dragon, which transmutes and transforms energies. It's powerful, it's protective, and has a certain role. In the galactic history, my understanding of the dragons is that they like the primordial energy, just like the phoenix. They usually are here for harmony, unification, and they uphold the law of one. There's the whole notion when we had this conversation about the Dracos, where there's different kind of castes, right?
Yes, yes.
There's like the Draco caste of the lizards, and then even the dinosaurs, they say it's the lower caste of the Dracos. Supposedly the dragons came from a different universe, and the highest caste, the dragons that we perceive, and there's the galactic ones, there's the ones that are on Earth that are also possibly sleeping in some caves, in some mountains, and Himalaya mountains in Bhutan and other places in the world. Yeah. We also know from mythology, dragons have been here. They are still here. We just don't see them currently because they sleep in. But the galactic dragon that you brought in was just so special because it was very powerful force and very humbling, so ancient in the wisdom of the multi.
Yeah, he was very protective. And I noticed once I tapped in more after our QHHT, when I wasn't feeling it that day, whatever I was going through mentally, I would ask Eradaus or him for protection. And it was almost, if I was in a crowd, it was as if a wing or a bubble. Depending on who sees this, some people might say or ask, why can't we see them? And how I explain this to people that ask me these similar questions, I feel like this can relate to how our dimension is. If you were to take a quarter and spin it slowly, you could still see the quarter rotate. You spin it faster, and it's almost as if it disappears. It's the same quarter, the same timeline, the same place, but it's just at a different frequency and it's spinning faster. There's plenty of people that developed their psyche and their intuition to where they could see or feel. I feel more than seeing with my third eye. Still practice. But nevertheless, it doesn't mean that they're not guiding you and they're just waiting.
I believe all of us who are starseeds, and probably those who are listening and tuning into this podcast right now, they have dragons that are somehow connected to them. They just need to have that intention, right? Everything else to want to connect and be aware of the dragon. I feel we're in such a change in times right now where the energies are getting more intense, and need to connect to our dragons and need to have that relationship with them and that soul connection, because they're aspects of ourselves, and they will help us also to persevere through whatever is going on to change, transmute whatever is necessary that may be in distortion or out of alignment of high purpose. So I think it is the time of the dragons. I'm really excited for this year because it's bringing that energy of the Aquarian age. We also know Pluto is returning in a few days on January 20th, which is the energy of destruction. It's really interesting because dragons are perceived in the folklore, in the movies, like the destroyers, right? They're spitting fire.
Protecting the gold, spitting fire.
That's the aggressive side of them. But I feel like there's also nurturing side of them too, that sometimes they show, sometimes they don't.
I feel like it's very symbolic when they put it in movies, because the stance where I'm at now coming into 2024, I started the LLC that I intend to use this year coming up and sharing just different things online. I've been putting it off for a while. A lot of 2024 is very symbolic, where I think the dragons, if anybody saw Lord of the Rings, they're protecting the gold. I think they're portrayed in a different way. From what I take from it, it's the protector of knowledge and the gold and the secret seas and the gems and everything. So it's not just they're greedy and they're angry, but there's light, there's dark. There's all different spectrums there.
Definitely in the middle. They are the chaos beings, where it's such a primordial energy. It can be in the light, it can be in the dark, and everywhere in between, just like Phoenix. So it's like this energy of the void and chaos and creation, where both hold place, the creation and destruction.
I'd have to agree. They're definitely like more neutral on that aspect. And I feel like they're neutral on the aspect to where they could go either side because they're so aligned, which creates the wisdom. I can see that reflected to us on a micro and macro scale, because at any individual, whether you're male or female, that's balanced, you have the head and the heart connection, ultimately, which gives a leader speak to where being neutral and not having your emotions dictate you or not having your thoughts dictate you so much is a beautiful aspect. I think that they're a full embodiment of that, for sure. Ultimately, chaos beings are chaos beings. There are certain entities and there's certain things. It's all about intention. With me, I've always had a love, honor, and respect for them. Our journey to Iceland was an absolute, I couldn't.
When you were mentioning movies, I was like, yeah, the other movie where dragons are portrayed is, of course, the Queen of the Dragons in Games of Thrones. Iceland is one of the places where Games of Thrones was shot. Beautiful imagery was taking place, and that's why Iceland has so many tourists these days, from what we learned on the journey. Yeah. We all started by Games of Thrones. So somehow it's tied to the dragons, right? One way or another. I would love you to share the experience of what happened in Iceland. Are you reconnected to your dragon, and how we found later, not only, the big story. I feel I want to take it out of the Game of Thrones scenario to real world, and the real connection that connected to our timeline here on Earth, where dragons were here in reality, and we have real proof of that.
Before we left for Iceland, I always knew it was a magical place, and you're reading up on it. There's a lot of folklore and a lot of fairies, and actually the locals with Bardar. Bardar was a half troll, half giant entity that's there. So just looking up and researching it, I sat with myself, and there was a lot of surrender due to financial situations. And I was like, you know what? I don't know how. And I understand that my great guardian is very much etheric, but maybe I can meet a descendant of his, and that would be fantastic. This was a few weeks prior. Then I thought about it, let it go. And here we are going over to Iceland. And I think the geysers started, and right off the plane, I was in awe because I felt so connected with that land. And we went to go visit different places, and you could feel like the elven capital. There's so much energy there, and the purity and the collectiveness between the etheric side of things and the local side of things that really immersed me into being there with both elements, our 3D and the spiritual realm. We went up to the geysers, and I kept getting pulled to one mountain, and that ended up being a lookout. And I'm like, okay. And I looked over and I remember I was like, I need you to take a picture of me on that peak right there. I walked over and of course it was roped off and I was like, I need to be up there. I don't know why. I just need to be right there. So I went underneath, dropped everything, and I wasn't really sure what I was looking at. The only thing was is that my heart was beating, beating, beating. It was coming out of my chest. And I
It
was like,
felt like a very important moment. I was just
huge.
supporting it, but it felt like it was you stepping on the mountain of your own power, but there was more there.
It was absolutely huge. I turned around, I put my arms out, and I could just feel the wind. It was like I've been there before, and I couldn't stop but look up at this mountain. And as soon as I did, I just got this whole rush of energy. Nothing came to me then, but I got this huge rush of energy, this huge rush of peace and home and just in awe and honor. I got emotional and I was like, that was something definitely for me. And it was great. And as we were walking down as a group, it hit me, Deanna. It just right there. And I was like, oh my God. I turned around and the clouds just cleared enough. Like, there's the head. It was the whole silhouette of the dragon.
I remember you were so emotional in that moment.
Yeah.
Realizing you seen the dragon.
I cried like a baby. It was the most beautiful moment in my life. Why didn't I see it then? But then I realized because of the heartbeats and so much energy, for me, not being as tuned into that just yet, it was probably too much for me to handle. So I took what I could. But I looked and I just cried because it was the most beautiful. It was like you haven't seen a relative in so long and you wanted to meet them so bad.
Yeah.
Ultimately. And it was just like I knew it. So after that, I think that was one of the most intense days because then we went towards the beach the next day after seeing Bardar. We worked a lot with this entity, Bardar, and he was like a grandfather to me.
Those who are listening, Iceland has different really beautiful national parks in different areas. So this was actually an area that we were heading because I was called to come to Iceland and do some activation work. So we came for summer solstice and I got very specific directions to go to the arm up northwest, the peninsula of the island to do the earth grid work, not knowing a lot about it. As we arrived to that edge of the peninsula to what many call the Bardo world because of this legend of the stroll Bardo that is Snifflesness. That's his last name.
Yes.
Peninsula called Snifflesness. We realized, wow, there's a bigger connection there. And so we went to this beautiful beach there with just special black rocks and energies. What we encountered there was unexpected. We encountered a dragon on the beach, petrified. We saw also some trolls that were petrified standing in the water. The whole area was clearly shown to us that real beings were there and they just got petrified in the moment. And we'll talk more a little about what we think happened. But just tell us the story of how we were on the beach and we both started feeling the energy and I got guided to bring you like a part of it. I didn't realize yet it was a dragon.
I didn't realize it either, but I remember us turning the corner and we were just like, oh, the energy was so different. It was like a sacred burial ground. I'm like, Deanna, did you feel what I just felt? We were just talking about the Atlantean and Valhalla timeline. How that all corresponded.
Olympus and Valhalla, yeah.
Olympus, yes. And you definitely had your peak of emotions there. So we were coming down from it and we were at the Pebble Beach, I believe.
We're recollecting what these places on Earth stand for.
Yeah.
Not only Iceland is a place where there's an interconnection between Lemuria and Atlantis, and that's one of the reasons we were there, to clear some of these energies and work with the water and recalibrate the grid and the energy of Kundalini that comes from the North Pole down through Iceland and Norway and to Canary Islands and on. So that was part of our work, but I don't think we expected the elementals to pop in and understand this petrification that happened in that area. It feels like it was before maybe Atlantis and Lemuria. It was somewhere in between where there was some sort of war that happened that maybe use molecular displacement, advanced weapons to petrify them. The dragon we found on the beach, you can see, was literally petrified in the moment. It wasn't, I think, expected to have that type of fate. Like any cemetery you go to, there's that quantum entanglement of the person, the being, to the cemetery space, to where the being once lived. I think that's what we're feeling, because we were all channeling like light language. We were all channeling. We were all connected to it, and we all realized at the same time that it was a dragon, massive one too.
It was definitely beautiful, because it was as if we like came to witness what needed to be witnessed and acknowledged for that spot. It was literally like what I felt. We jumped timelines, and because I totally felt it, and I could hear it for sure. And I think what even caught our attention before we even pulled up to the beach was that there was hands, like troll hands, coming from the water. It was beautiful, definitely emotional time, because the ancientness and the physicality I felt with that particular space, it was horrific, even though I don't want to say that, but it was astonishing to me of the size of the entities, whether it be energetic or physical, to hold and still make that much impact to us today, so we can tap in and to feel it and to honor it or acknowledge it or to make peace, whatever our galactic role was then. And we did do beautiful offerings, the death of those beings wholeheartedly.
The size, you're totally right, was massive. I'm really understanding how big a dragon can be, because we just talk about, we see it in the movies, and it's hard to really capture and understand the magnificence of the sheer size of a dragon. It looks like a rock, right? Like massive rock, very tall. You wouldn't really put one and one together unless you start feeling the energy. And then as we backed off and started looking from the side, then we saw the face, we saw the paws. I brought you into one of the paws. What was even more special, I feel, is you started connecting the dragon family together. The mountain and this dragon on the beach, you felt they were all family.
I'm gonna get emotional. It was an honor to bridge that together. I guess it was an understanding for me and my past lives as well. There was definitely other beings there, which were like humanoid as well, that worked with them or took care of them or battled alongside them, which I very much connected with. I felt very much that the first dragon experience that I had on top of that mountain was very much like an initiation or a blessing for me to allow to either make peace or to connect or to acknowledge.
And that first dragon was the dragon that you remember from your past life that you worked with. It was your dragon.
That was one, yes. Yeah.
That you remembered.
I felt my great guardian twice. The one on the mountain was more so of the facilitator of that moment, because that dragon on the mountain also was very much connected with the collective that I'm connected to, with my great guardian Eradaus. I felt it more so when we were on the beach, that I was closer to him and the sorrow that he felt through me, or I through him, for sure.
There's beautiful, like, blurry lines here. Like, what is who and who is what, and
it was definitely, I felt a descendantary, because when you and I talked after the QHHT, it makes more sense where the collective of it can also come to you in different forms. I think it's the streamline of that DNA on a quantum level, which is what I can connect to and recognize, whether it be more so or not. I think it's what I also feel is the bloodline as well. And I felt like the ones on the beach were more so connected to their guardian source than the one on the mountain. It was a lot lighter, to where there's more of a masculine, no BS, and we're here to protect. I think those dragons that were there on the beach were in that role more so than just being dormant and waiting for their time.
What's incredible, what we share here, you don't read this in the history books.
You don't.
This is something we encountered, and I had a beautiful validation about it when I talked to Deadova, because she encountered some of these petrification in South Africa. It is something that is hard to conceptualize, but yet it makes sense. Because we can know the whole history. Also, some things were probably erased out of the history anyway. What is definitely true is that the people of Iceland really connected to these elemental energies.
For sure.
Through generations, and even this modern generation still talks about it. Maybe not so much the people in the cities, but we did connect to some locals in the smaller towns who do special offerings to the elves, who make sure when the road is being built, a rock is moved out of the way. There might be some elves of fairies living there. This reverence for these elemental energies, because as the veil is thinning, I think we will get more and more encounters with them. It just happens to be in Iceland. There's just so many more of them in one concentrated space. It's a relatively new island on Earth. And so through the Viking history, I think these elementals have a place there, more maybe than in other places. But we have fairies. We have other energies around us all the time. With this podcast, we want to encourage you to connect to your dragons, to connect to elementals in general, as continue talking about dragons with other speakers that I bring on and understanding this energy. I think it's beautiful. It was an honor for me, Alycia, to experience energy through you and your connection with them. I would love you to maybe share some light language. Those who don't know what light language is, or source language as I call it, the multi-dimensional communication that comes directly from the soul, and it's channeled. It's not something you learn. It's something you just transmit in the moment, and there's no direct interpretation, but it's the language of the heart. And dragons come to me often, so I'll also maybe bring some through, but maybe Alycia, you can start, and we can bring a little bit of source language and a little bit of taste of the frequency of the dragons.
If anybody knows playing video games, Skyrim, it'll sound like that. It'll be rough depending on what it is. It's more very earthy, very airy, very like scruff and everything. And it's a very massive energy. So our beautiful friend Marion, she's literally kicked us off different platforms because she doesn't.
I'll bring Marion in to have a podcast with her as well. There's like different, I would say, dialects of language, source language, and everyone's connected to different dragon too. So we'll each bring our own. I just invite everyone to tune in. You can close your eyes to receive, or just take a moment to receive what's coming in. Source language is the frequency language. So you might feel it as tingles. It might just resonate with you. It might be just like very foreign and very like alien sounding. If you hear it for the first time. But always know what resonates, you take, what doesn't. Your higher self is the filter here. For each one of you, it's going to be a different experience of receiving it. But just be open to receive. Beautiful. Thank you for that, Alycia.
I'm burning up. I gotta leave you for so long.
Intense. You bring through. It's very intense, and it warms you up quick, which is the energy of the dragon.
For anybody that listens to this, Diana is coming up with a light language course, and I've learned light language and gained the confidence from her specifically. So I would like to thank you also. She's an amazing teacher.
Mary and I launched February 1st a masterclass, but also offering very affordable, easy to digest, self-paced course. Anyone interested in opening these type of channels, this is your opportunity to do so in a very gentle way. And we always also available for one-on-one sessions as well with that. I'm actually going to bring my dragon too. My dragon is a little different than yours. Yours, I feel, is very like, ooh, mine, she's like pink and purple. But I've observed in mine, because every frequency I listen to is a lot of hot sounds, definitely a lot of guttural. So, because I also channel Draco, and it definitely hits your throat.
It'll definitely make your throat sore for sure.
A little different than, I feel Draco sounds like Lignon from Star Trek. Whether dragon or Draco is really well in clearing the energies, clearing the field. I'm always appreciated of that massive energy, even though it might be a little uncomfortable for the body initially to get used to. So just continue tuning in, taking a deep breath in, and then bringing mine in. Hawandi Honda Hawaii Handi Shukundu Baha Iku Hua Iki Hua Hiawahi.
Felt that. Wow, she's beautiful.
She's very wise.
Mine's very much the brash. And it's interesting because if I kept going more, I would feel it in my throat and in the esophagus. And it's like your body needs to expand. Like the spine, it's real.
And also I feel like it definitely activates the solar plexus, because there's like a lot of this powerful energy in the solar plexus, kind of activates and ignites. If you listening to this and you felt a bit of solar plexus activity, that might be something that this frequency does to you as well, reminding you that you are a powerful being, because you are part of the dragon clan and collective as well. We all intergalactically been in different aspects, and that's most likely your aspect too. We just need to remember this earthly reality is just one game, one show, but we traverse different realms and galaxies.
Yeah, and a multitude of others.
A multitude of ways, right? In a beautiful type of tapestry and cleared fields and orchestrated web of beautiful creations.
And speaking of the fairies, dragons are actually the protector of the fairy realm.
That's right.
So it was very interesting because going back to Iceland. Also, for those that are out there, shout out to Iceland for the eruptions and the evacuations. So my heart goes out to them. A lot of prayer and love.
The dragon energy, that fire and ice. That's so present there, the fire and ice. And the fire is like that also, like part of Mother Earth, of releasing and upgrading herself. And in some ways, yes, it's inconvenient in some ways to have that in places where humans live, but she also needs to do that as well, especially in places where she's still figuring herself out. Iceland is relatively new spot on Earth, so that's why she's so active there. The fire is element itself, I feel, being very representative of the dragon. Even of the wooden dragon, it's still very much force, and it's the element of the gods. When you look at the fire pit, you right away quiet down your thoughts, you connect to the energy of the source, you just present to what is. It's such a powerful element that we have here on Earth. I do feel it exists in other dimensional spaces as well. We appreciate here, and we appreciate the heat.
Absolutely.
Especially in the midst of the winter.
Absolutely. Ultimately, in nature, whenever there's fire, it eventually becomes regrowth and abundance. So that may just very well be what's going over there in Iceland, and with the different storms, all the different elements, after the chaos becomes the abundance and the renewal. I think we're going to see a lot of that in different forms this year. And with the wooden dragon being very earthy, and also that movement, I think there's going to be a lot of truth for sure. I feel like a lot more people that are aware of what's going on will become very much in their authenticity and self. Also, what Dolores Cannon said as well, the elementals are going to be a huge part of transitioning us and themselves with Mother Gaia, going to the new earth and the new way of being. So I think very much with the whole dragon talk of this podcast is really to release people from the programming or help assist the programming where they're not real or they're not this, just because you can't see something. And with you and I experiencing all the elven energy and Bardar, the giants and trolls and everything, I feel like saying the reason why that essence is still alive is because the locals honor them. We went kayaking and the kayaking instructor was like, that rock up there, that was a troll and her baby. And that a lot with different cultures around the world ultimately, and with the US it's like the lack thereof, and some other places too. And I feel like that'll definitely help in the States, and with Gaia alone is really acknowledging, no, you're not crazy, and yes, you did see a little gnome run around. Yes, that is a fairy. Like, those things are for real. And I think a lot that's going to happen or help is obviously grounding, like you've told me so many times. Gardening, you can make your own little fairy garden or a little gnome garden, or there's so many different ways to honor your lineage. I think what the dragons are actually calling us to do more is because they're tied into that. They're the guardians of that. Beautiful experience.
I mean, they're dragons of our realm too, right? So
Right.
if you think about it, and I would love to bring my friend on one of these podcasts who is connected to one of the dragons that she believes sleeps in the mountains in Bhutan. And there is this thing about not waking up those dragons yet because it's not the time yet. We get in there, that energetic transition we're in, and at some point maybe these dragons will be awakened when the time is right. So some of them perhaps in very long sleep because they need to be, and we just on a consciousness level are not there yet to accept them.
Yeah.
We still unpeeling these, like you said, conditions of what is true, what is not true, what part of the myth is just a myth and what part of it is the reality. The timelines we choose of what we want to believe and want to create a new earth reality we want to build. If you want to see something and you believe it, you will see it. You will see these energies. You will feel them. But if you close off and you create doubts and you repress your emotions and you resist, then you're not going to feel anything. It's all going to be just another conversation and you're just not going to accept it. And that's okay too. It just means you perhaps in a different frequency bandwidth and you're just not ready for some of the experiences that we discussed here today. And it's nice to have the ability to open up to your source light language to know how to communicate to this energy too. So there is like a reciprocal conversation going on, or you can just listen as well. I think listening is important these days. I'm just reminded that my friend Shivani mentioned that with the dragons too, you have to like whisper into the ear because they sleep in. So you whispering. It's like this wind energy. You got to be not aggressive and gentle. They're not fully awoken yet. So there's something to that.
It's almost what I just saw is waking up an old, really senior aged dog, because the wisdom's there, and if you startle them too much, like, like what's going on? But for sure they're not dogs, but yeah, they're definitely a force to be honored, and reckoned with, for sure, and to be respected and massive. The best illustration on their size, I think, is close, was the Game of Thrones, for sure, when they aged up. But I'm here to tell you, there's bigger ones out there. There's bigger ones.
Tiny ones too.
Tiny ones too, yes.
There is a concept of rainbow dragons, the diamond frequencies. I think the reason why we also call them dragons, because they also move in and out. So it's not necessarily humanoid form type of energy.
Yeah, totally agree. And for people who would like to get in touch with, Dragons by Deanna Cooper, the Oracle deck, for sure, if you ever wanted to try that out. Rainbow dragons are definitely a blessing as well. You have Thor dragons, you have the elemental dragons. There's so many different dragons where it comes to, based off of the element, the different frequencies, 4D, 5D, 6D, 7D, further on, as well as the galactic dragons, the ones that walk and work alongside ascended masters and archangels is what we perceive them. And there's totally different energies. Just, I think you've mentioned it, tuning your dial to a different frequency. I wanted to say the Dragon Age is here, and
The dragon is
He's just here. So yeah,
it is.
so I'll just stick with that.
Officially,
They're always here, but I'm gonna feel the dragon presence very much more in this year.
I love it. Alycia, what would you recommend for those who have tapped into the dragon? Like anything that you do to nourish your dragon or continue connecting to your dragon that you found helpful on your journey?
Anything shiny that symbolizes, it's almost like fairies.
Yeah, I was about to say. There's a lot of shiny stuff. Yeah.
Almost like fairies. Anything with a fire, so to speak, or working with the elements. Even taking a hike, focus your vision like through the trees. This is how I've done it. Or have a space for them, almost like you call it an altar or a space, even like in your garden or in your home. Have a drawing or something like that. I have so many crystals in my house. I have obsidian dragon head because my guide is very much on a darker scale. I was trying to find one in blue moonstone, I believe it's called, or goldstone, blue goldstone. But any kind of colors that come to you when you think of it, you could wear it, you could paint a certain drawing or anything like that. If you notice when you're thinking about them and there's certain foods or different metals that come to you, for sure, trust that. A lot of it is with trust. I'm still working with my guide. I feel like because he's such a collective and etheric, is more of the intention and the honoring for him, even though I do have material stuff. Just as if you were to put out a bed for a cat or a dog or a pet, even though they're not pets. Or if you have an altar for your ancestors, just a regular symbol of a dragon or a little dragon statue with the colors that you think or the dragons that come to you, and have a relationship, just like you were to have a relationship with any of your other guides or God, whichever one you choose to believe in, or source, however you call it. You know, have a relationship with that and just trust it, because that's ultimately what helped me and call upon them. I had an experience in this house, actually, and this is when I think me and my guide were definitely solidified, where it's, okay, I hear you and you hear me and you're here for me. But when I tapped into my abilities, I was sleeping in this house at one point, and there was an entity. I developed sleep paralysis. My first encounter ever with sleep paralysis, and there was an entity that did not look so friendly above me, and I call upon my guide, and it was like a vortex opened up and I could see like the massive hands of this thing. Next thing I know, I woke up and I was able to move. So it's more of the intention than anything wearing colors. That's how I started. I just recently got a specific altar that was wood, which is fire burned into a dragon too. It's taking the time to put in the effort to having that connection, or just thinking about it. That's really how it starts off, and developing that. It'll guide you on your way, ultimately. But that's how I started, with different colors and stones and dragon little statues.
Beautiful. If you are being called to work with the dragon energy, I think having a little altar is always helpful to have as a reminder. So if you don't have an altar in the house yet, you can always create one. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can be just a piece of material you put on, and then a couple of little rocks and representations. It's the representation for yourself, for calling in that energy, for reminder to work with that energy.
Yeah.
And especially when you're in nature. I feel like when you're in nature, you can always connect to it easier because you have less distractions. Definitely with the fairies, I know that works easy. With the dragons as well. Just be out there, listen to the wind, listen to the whisper.
When the trees move and everything.
There's water dragons, there's different dragons too, based on the elements.
Yep, and not all dragons have skills. They
not all
come.
dragons. I didn't know that. Which ones don't?
I'm not quite sure which ones don't. More so of, I want to say, the air element and the water element, they're a little bit different. The air element, from my perspective anyway, and how I see it, is they're more feathery. The water dragons honestly would look like almost a Loch Ness, almost, from what I've seen briefly. But don't be too attached on unnecessarily what it looks like. Develop that as you are. Because I could say my my great guardian. Sometimes he's more solid and has scales. Other times he's just a shadow or wind. They could take on different forms for sure. Just like any of your other guides or your angels and how they want to be seen or perceived, or maybe that's a way of connecting with you. Hey, I'm coming in as a cloud right now, but work with me and maybe you'll start to see a face and different things. So just trust. It took a lot for me to trust myself, for sure, because who was I going to talk to about, like, I think I'm connected to a really big collective consciousness of dragon. It's a little kid would say, but ultimately you have to like just be free with it.
Yeah. And you just said it, it's like the little kid, right? So we have to drop into being this innocent children and letting our imagination roam wild. Because who's putting limitation on it? Only ourselves.
Yeah.
So
there's no right or wrong. It's when you know and you understand, because I understand what I just said could be very abroad. And it's okay, how do I know then? How do I know when I cannot? The synchronicities that come after. Let's see if you see, okay, dragon, or you yellow, and you just happen to look up and a yellow bird flies by. That's a synchronicity. That could be like, okay, cool, confirmation. So it could be very abroad, but when the synchronicities happen, more so right as you ask the question or you're aware of things, that's when you know you're onto something. Took me a little bit to learn.
That's like a wink from the universe. Wink,
yeah.
wink.
Yeah.
You
got it.
The more you start paying attention, the more you'll see it, right? Again, it's like you only see what you want to believe or what you're paying attention to. Otherwise, it just passes by. People are telling me, oh my God, I get 1111 all the time. I'm like, 1111 is so like yesterday. You're like, we get new numbers now. By the way, talking about numbers, so 777 feels like the numbers for the dragons. So that's something you can always kind of call the numbers, because everything is mathematical, right? We're in a mathematical universe. And so the sevens seem to be the numbers working with the dragons. I'm stoked for the age of the dragon and what we get to create and be and step it into our dragon selves.
I think that's where the authenticity is coming, because dragons, they don't answer to nobody and they don't explain themselves. It's either you like it or you don't.
I like that.
They're set and they'll listen, and they're very discerning because they're so wise. So I feel like a lot of people are going to embody what we call authentic, which would be very much of that, no, this is my power. I'm in my power. If you don't like it, that's okay. There's other people. And just be loving, just release with peace and love. That's it.
Not everyone resonates with dragons. Like sometimes people perceive the energy being a little too aggressive and too much. It's not always gentle. Those who in my life who are dragons, they're definitely like sometimes afford to
brash
and understand. But I think ultimately the authenticity, I feel, because it comes from the heart, is always for the greatest good. Yes. And even if you might not resonate with it in a moment and you don't want to hear the truth, not everyone wants to hear the truth these days. They're trying to leap from the truth. I think ultimately serves the greater good and your higher self when you're ready for it.
If you wanted to try this out, just be like, hey, dragon, I need help with my homework, this exam coming up. Can you please burn away all distractions within this week and see how that happens? Because the dragons are really good for protection and making way. You have a clear path to get to where you want to go, no matter how big or how small. There's other things to work in there, but predominantly they're really good at that, for sure. So you could always play around with that and see what happens if you feel called to it.
We encourage you to. That's why you listen to this podcast. So you have a fun journey of connecting and learning more about the dragons and inviting them into your energy field and playing with them and see how they can help you on your journey. Thank you so much, Alycia, for sharing all of that. I think it was wonderful to connect and remember Iceland.
Yes.
I really appreciate you as a beautiful dragon in my life. That is very authentic.
Thank you.
And always in the heart. And I encourage you to find those friends in your life who are the dragons. You have a lot to learn from them. They're awesome.
No, for sure. Thank you for having me on your podcast. This is exciting and what an honor. And I'm
Amazing.
grateful. I'm grateful for you and your family to be in my life and to be where I'm at today. Thank you so much.
Amazing.
With the
And
dragons.
yay. And thank you for tuning in, and hope to have you listen to the rest of this dragon series as we dive deeper into understanding what this energy is about and how it manifests itself in different forms. And have a beautiful rest of the day.
Bye, guys.
The dragon age is here. Yay!
Yay!